The second question that always comes up is, how can Jesus be the Son of God? And there is a confusion here. In Surah 6, Ayah 101, and in Surah 5, 17, it assumes that the Son of God, Jesus, is a biological son, that there's a biological relationship, that God somehow birthed Jesus. Now, we're not believing that at all. It's obvious that no way that anybody in this room, and certainly in the scriptures, there's no reference anywhere that Jesus was birthed by God. No. Jesus is the second person of the Trinity. He has always existed. He has pre-existed Jesus. He was there co-creating with God at the very beginning. No, there was no biological relation. So what does this mean? Well, Luke 2:49 helps us here. Luke 2:49 uses the word monogenes, that he is the begotten son. He is the monogenes or monogenes, one and only son. He's a unique son. It's a relational title. The Son of God is a relational title. And the best way to help Muslims understand that is to go back to the Quran itself. In Surah 2, Ayah 177, you have the reference to Ibn ul-Sabili. Ibn ul-Sabili is a traveler. Somebody who's traveling along the road is a son of the road. Now, nobody in their right mind thinks that someone who's traveling on the road is actually born out of the ground of the road. No. Ibn ul-Sabili basically is a relation. He has a relationship with the road. I am a son of America. You are all sons of your own countries, or daughters of your own countries. That doesn't mean that you were born out of the earth of the country. No, this is relational. It's quite well used in many contexts. So nowhere do we mean by Son of God that we're saying that Jesus is a biological son. Not at all. There's a confusion here, and Muslims need to recognize that. I think part of the confusion may have also come out of Surah 5, 116, which stipulates and basically assumes that both Jesus and Mary are part of the Godhead, seeming to suggest that God had sex with Mary and from their progeny came Jesus. Now, if that is the case, then they've got a pretty warped view of the Trinity. Nobody, I don't think, in this room believes that Jesus and God, Jesus came from a union of God and Mary. There's no Christians that believe that. But more than that, I find it ironic that the Muslims are asking the question in the first place. If they have a problem with God having a son, then they're going to have to question their Quran. Because in Surah 39, Ayah 4, it states that very thing. If God so had willed it, it says in Surah 39, 4, he could have a son. There it is in black and white. The Quran admits that God can have a son, a biological son. It makes no bones about the fact that God can or cannot have a biological son. So why are they questioning the Bible to begin with? The irony is that we're not saying he did have a biological son. The fact that they question it means that they're going to have to question the Quran as well. So it flips right back on them. The real question they're really talking about, though, is not whether or not God had a son or did not have a son, or whether Jesus was that son. What they're really questioning, and the problem that they're really having, is could God ever enter time and space? Could God ever become a man? That's the real question. How could God become a man? And that's one I get from Muslims all the time. And I have to scratch my head on this one. I remember I did a debate up in Kazan in Russia last year, and I did a debate with two other Tajik missionaries that heard that I was in town, wanted to debate me, and so we'd set up a debate on a Sunday afternoon for 3 hours, all in Russian. I had to use 3 different translators to get through the debate, and one of the first questions that came up was this question: how, Mr. Smith, can you believe that God can enter time and space? How could God become a man? How could God become one of us? How could God become a polluted human being like us, weak like us? How dare you say God could become weak? And I just started shaming them. Shame on you. You tell me that God is omnipotent, do you not? You tell me that God can do anything. And here you're telling me that God cannot do something as simple as becoming a man. Shame on you. Because in saying he cannot become a man, you've taken away his omnipotence. Don't ever do that to God. Of course God can become a man. It's simple for God to become a man. Listen, he created us, for heaven's sakes. If he created us, could he not participate in his own creation? Absolutely he can. And if you do not allow him to become a man, then you've taken away his omnipotence, and you are starting to tell God what he can and cannot do. I get sick and tired of Muslims telling me that God cannot eat, he cannot drink, he cannot go to the bathroom. What kind of God can't do those things? Of course God can do that. My God can, maybe their God cannot. And I said to these two deists, listen, if you believe God can't become a man, then you've got a pretty small God. You need a bigger God. You better come on home. Better come back home to my God. My God can become a man anytime he wants to. He's big enough to become a man. Come on, get a bigger God. Come on home. We've got the big God. You want a big God? We've got him. Come on back to that God. Because he did become a man at the very beginning. Who was there in the Garden of Eden walking and talking with Adam and Eve? That was God. Who was there in front of the tent of Mamre eating with Abraham? That was God. Who was there wrestling with Jacob? That was God. Who was in front of the Israelites there as a pillar of fire at night and a pillar of cloud in the day? That was God. In fact, hold on a minute. You're telling me God cannot come down to earth? Let's open up the Quran and let's open up to Surah 20, Ayah 14. Because in Surah 20, Ayah 14, you will see that God, Allah, it says this is Allah who is talking from within the burning bush to Moses. When Moses goes up to see what that fire is in chapter 20, in Surah 20, by the time he gets to verse 14, the voice comes out of the bush, says, take off your shoes, you are on hallowed ground. This is Allah who is speaking to you. So who was in that burning bush according to the Quran if it wasn't God? And that burning bush is on earth. So stop telling me that God can't come to and enter time and space. Of course he can. He does so in your Quran. I get tired of Muslims always telling God what he can and cannot do. And I think we need to shame them. I shamed these two deists on the night, and they finally had to leave the question, go to another question. They never came back to it again. And you could see their problem. I would have a problem if I were in their place. God can certainly become a man. It's easy for him to become a man. We need to let him tell us what he can and cannot do.